Chapter 1. The Whispering Tome. Emmanuel Arnhelm was far from a hero. Once he may have harboured such aspirations, but that was no longer the case. His disillusionment stemmed not from a betrayal by the gods, who had taken from him all he held dear, but from a deep-rooted belief that the world itself was unworthy of salvation. For a considerable time he had wrestled with this idea, arriving at a singular truth: power always corrupts. No mortal could wield it without being irrevocably altered. It warped all it touched, and some might contend that it had warped him as well. If he had any talent, it was in his ability to keep such power from the hands of mankind, or so he hoped. Immortality had dulled his senses, flooding his mind with too many experiences, leaving him weary, not in a manner that sleep could remedy. Yet he pressed on, propelled not by clear intention, but by the faint echo of a time when goodness had flourished before the kings of men succumbed to their failings. All had been disgraced, dishonoured, and shamed for their audacity to liberate their realms from divine shackles. Emmanuel remained alone in his burden, condemned to witness the devastation of Diden's Gate. Lives extinguished, and everything reduced to mere ash to serve as a cruel lesson. He was a king enveloped in suffering, punished for his arrogance. King. The title tasted bitter on his tongue, a mere label devoid of meaning. He ached for the taste of meat, a lingering emptiness gnawing at him. How long had it been since he savoured a meal? When had he last quenching his thirst? When had he indulged in spirits? The answers eluded him. Was it 1,000 days? 1,000,000? The fall of his kingdom, Diden's Gate, had become a nebulous haze in his memory, its recollections scattered like ash on the breeze, the very embers that had engulfed his throne. He veered off course. This was not the story meant to be shared, yet it was crucial in illuminating the corrupted foundations of their world. What, then, does one do when all monsters have been vanquished? For centuries, Emmanuel felt as though he wandered without purpose, until the Whispering Tome came into his possession. Its pages contained power beyond the comprehension of mortal minds, an undeniable corruption. The scars from Diden's Gate ran deep, yet the act of sealing the starlit gates was a righteous endeavour. Once, celestial portals had adorned Alos Kephi, creating links to the Empyrean, Nether, and Void. Emmanuel had destroyed them all, unnoticed, as the Church of Silvera ushered in a facade of peace. However, the Whispering Tomes possessed wills of their own and could reopen those gateways. He could not permit what lay beyond to ravage the land again. He hoped the eccentric wizard Munda had been correct about this tome. The rogue mage's insights were often questionable, yet his unparalleled ability to uncover hidden artifacts was remarkable. Emmanuel pondered the source of Munda's information. It was evident that the old recluse lacked companions, tucked away in isolation on the far eastern shore. Emmanuel suspected that Munda coveted his sword, restrained solely by the knowledge that Emmanuel could not be slain. Better as an ally than an adversary, Munda was nonetheless untrustworthy. His leads could easily be sold to others. Time would reveal the truth, and if the outcome was not to Emmanuel's liking, he would soon be facing the old wizard again, though their next meeting would not be cordial. For weeks, Emmanuel had scoured the ancient woods for a long-abandoned keep, just beyond the borders of Freehold and near Vyloria, yet untouched by its corrupting influence. Solspire, the very heart of Vyloria, was a bastion of power he intentionally shunned. The paladins, particularly irksome to him, were simplistic pawns of the pontiff, oblivious to the church's machinations, cloaked in a deception of sanctity. Emmanuel held disdain for the pontiff and the noble families dwelling within, viewing them as self-proclaimed prophets of forgotten gods who had not graced this realm for millennia, Vialoria claimed to advocate for those without a voice, all under the guise of power. It always circled back to the same truth. Power corrupts. He pushed his wide-brimmed leather hat back on his head, its weight a familiar comfort against his silver-streaked hair. The warmth of the bandu tree enveloped his back, its blood-red sap radiating an intensity to rival any fire. Dubbed bleeding trees by locals or deemed the forest of the dead, these trees deterred travellers with their menacing crimson resin. Emmanuel cherished the tranquility and solitude of this place. It was untrammelled by human presence. With deliberate ease he opened his eyes, not from fatigue, but from a lack of urgency. Now over 3,000 years old, the passage of time held little significance for him. While many would kill for immortality, its worth had diminished for Emmanuel, hollowed out by the loss of his lineage and kingdom. Once, he had been fueled by the fervour of youth, eager to amend past injustices. But those days were long gone. Rising, he brushed aside the leaves that had fallen during the night. He carried little weight on his journey, needing neither food nor drink. His body was sustained by an ancient force bestowed by the gods. He savoured the sweet scent of sap, the scarce light filtering through the thick canopy, and the warm, westerly breeze laden with tropical air. Spring had firmly established its grip. Emmanuel stood as a tall, seasoned figure, forever marked in his late 40s by the curse of immortality. His black hair, adorned with silver streaks and tied back loosely, framed a gaunt face adorned with scars from the Battle of Stormcrag. His grey eyes, though sharp, bore the dullness of millennia spent in sorrow. A battered, wide-brimmed leather hat cast a shadow over his brow, while a faded cloak, patched from numerous voyages, draped over him, concealing the black blade of Dawnrend. His lean frame was sheathed in worn leather, moving with the grace of a predator, each step embodying the burden of forgotten realms. No discernible path traversed the sparse woodland, although the underbrush was insignificant. From time to time, he unsheathed his dagger to clear away tendrils of vine, an action that regrettably impeded his progress. How he longed to do the same to the harrowing thoughts that tormented him. His efforts bore fruit when he stumbled upon a shallow stream, its sandy banks scattered with stones. Kneeling down, he drank deeply, not from necessity, but for the sheer vivacity of it, each sip a revitalizing touch of life that rekindled his spirit. An ancient energy, long faded from memory, coursed through the water, its name as lost as much of Alos Kephi's lore. Emmanuel had lived through 2 ages, though the count of years slipping by remained elusive. No manuscript survived to uncover the world's concealed truths, much of it either hidden or erased. Rising from the stream, he felt momentarily liberated from his troubling thoughts and chose to follow its east-west flow for more manageable travel. The stream's broad, shallow banks afforded him a clear path, leaving scant traces of his passage, despite his usual caution. The desolate forest, acting as a barrier between Vialoria and Freehold, lay undisturbed by travellers. By midday he arrived at the ruins exactly as Munda had described. While the mage occasionally proved correct, Emmanuel held reservations about him, particularly unsettled by Munda's avaricious gaze fixated on the sword at his side. Left unchecked, that man would eagerly strip him of his possessions. Nonetheless, thus far, only one lead had faltered, grave robbers having arrived at the site before him. Even then, Munda had been right. Little remained of the keep, its towers and walls ensnared by rampant overgrowth, embedded in a rocky formation that likely concealed caves, an archetypal defensive design. Should anything endure, it lay buried beneath rubble or vegetation. Emmanuel searched through the dense vines, uncovering a double wooden door buried at the back which should not have existed. He vigorously hacked away the encroaching growth with his dagger, releasing a tangy fragrance with each vine he severed. When he grasped the rusted handle, it snapped off effortlessly. How was he to open it? If the handle had broken, it seemed likely the hinges would follow suit. An idea formed. Perhaps a little force would dislodge the door. He managed to wedge his fingers into the narrow gap between the doors, just sufficient for leverage. Planting his foot against one door, he pulled on the other with all his strength. After moments of strenuous effort, the hinges finally yielded. Collapsing inward at an awkward angle, he attempted to brace himself against the unexpected fall, but landed ungracefully atop the fallen door. The musty odour of decay and wet moss ascended to greet him as a dark corridor emerged ahead. Rising and brushing off the debris, he took a cautious step inside. He pondered what the keep might have been during its glory days, a majestic fortress, perhaps ruled by a king or noble. No visible heraldry or flags lingered, yet he could discern the faded remnants carved into the stone walls. The tunnel felt remarkably preserved, aging at a slower pace than the decaying ruins above, suggesting an old power deliberately safeguarded here. As Emmanuel ventured downwards, illumination diminished, revealing a grand staircase rather than a mere hallway, its edges smoothed by the passage of time. A sickly green luminescence flickered to life, ectoplasmic flames, a further affirmation of his earlier thoughts. Was a necromancer or alchemist at work here? With each step he took deeper into the keep, the echoes of his footfalls reverberated off the walls, as if the ancient structure still drew breath. The glow intensified as he entered a derelict throne room, its stonework chipped yet intact, illuminated by green, flaring sconces. This was clearly influenced by necromantic magic. A stone throne, once ornate but now worn smooth, stood against the rear wall, stripped of any symbols. Slumped upon it was a Draugr lord, one hand firmly gripping a sword embedded in the floor. Emmanuel recognized its curse. Not akin to his own, but similar. A transformation wrought from suffering. The remaining room was a disarray of aged remnants, not indicative of a recent battle, but rather the passage of time, with many items in disrepair. It appeared to be a fallback area, suggesting that the keep had been fortified against potential overrun, yet Emmanuel saw no escape route other than the way he had entered. He approached cautiously, stopping 10 yards away from the Draugr, who sat silently upon the throne. Emmanuel felt an unsettling familiarity in its gaze, but dismissed it as mere imagination. Kneeling, placing his hand on his knee, and lowering his head, he spoke. "I come to speak with the Lord of these halls." The sconces ignited, casting an eerie glow as green ectoplasm swirled around the Draugr lord. Its bones clicked into place, and its eyes ignited with a sickly luminescence. Lifting its head, it fixed its gaze upon Emmanuel, who lowered his own in deference to the ancient lord. Leaning heavily on its sword, the Draugr rose, looming far above him, a figure out of nightmarish legend. "Who dares intrude upon my sanctuary?" it thundered, turning to confront him. "I will cleave thee in twain and scatter thy remains across the starlit gate." Its voice wavered, the Draugr's eyes narrowing as they met Emmanuel's. "Oh, could it be you?" The Draugr lord knelt, its skeletal face mere inches from Emmanuel's. "It is thee!" it exclaimed, surprise infusing its gravelly tone. "King Arnhelm, A jagged grin emerged, teeth uneven and sparse. "You have not aged a day." Emmanuel suppressed a grimace at the foul stench of decay that permeated the air, yet he felt compelled to engage. "You're not looking too well yourself, old friend," he remarked, a faint, bittersweet smile breaking through the fatigue etched across his scarred face. Edwic's once majestic form now loomed as a ghastly shade of his former self, his Draugr flesh sagging over brittle bones, a mockery of the king he had once been. Edwic's laughter rumbled through the desolate throne room, its hollow echo stirring dust from the cracked stone floor. It was a sound both joyous and mournful, a remnant of brighter days. Although Emmanuel could not recall the specifics of their last encounter, the bond forged in the era of kings, when Theria and Solspire stood proud, remained unbroken. Edwic, the last ruler of Solspire before the Church of Silverer ascended, had fallen after Daiden's Gate, his transformation into a Draugr, a grim saga of betrayal. "It's been ages since I've heard another voice," Edwic spoke, his gravelly tone softening with a hint of nostalgia. He shifted, bones creaking like dry wood, leaning on his sword, its tip embedded in the stone. "What brings you here, Emmanuel? Had I known you were coming, I might have at least tidied up." "I'm in search of a tome you possess," Emmanuel replied, his voice resolute yet grave. "A whispering tome. The Church must not acquire it." Edwic's skeletal grin twisted into a snarl, revealing jagged teeth. "To hell with the Church," he spat, venom lacing every word. "I'd gladly cast every last priest into the jaws of the Netherweave." Emmanuel raised an eyebrow in curiosity, intrigued by the raw animosity in his old friend's voice. "You don't know?" Edwic questioned, his imposing figure sagging slightly, as if the weight of centuries pressed down upon him, his gaze dimmed, fixed on some distant memory beyond Emmanuel's shoulder. "I've heard the tales," Emmanuel replied, his tone measured yet edged with interest. "But how did the Church take the city?" Edwic lowered his head, the green light in his hollow sockets flaring for a brief moment. "They didn't storm the gates, as you might think," he lamented, sorrow thick in his voice. "After Daiden's Gate burned, the priests infiltrated like a creeping rot. They spread falsehoods, turned my people against me, accused me of consorting with demons for my crown, sowing discord in the squares, murmuring treachery in the taverns. My own folk turned, stones in their hands, curses on their lips." He paused, clutching the hilt of his sword tightly. "I tried to fight, rallied my guard, but a king is powerless when his city clamours for his death. They dragged me from the throne, and the Church, they simply walked in." Emmanuel's heart ached at the recollection of Daiden's fall. "I understand that pain," he said softly, his voice barely a whisper. "Watching everything you held dear crumble. I'm sorry, Edwic." Edwic lifted his gaze, the dim glow within softening almost to a human quality. "Anyone else, and I'd dismiss it as empty words, but not you. You have always bled for your people. I envied that," he admitted, pausing before adding, "I should have stood with you when Daiden's Gate fell. I should have fought for you. Instead, I succumbed to fear for Solspire and lost it anyway. If you had fought, Solspire might have endured," Emmanuel replied gently but firmly. "You did what you believed was right." Edwic's laughter was bitter, a harsh rasp that stirred the dust. "Right? Look at me, friend. A decaying shell shackled to this tomb, and Solspire? A den of snakes lurking in Silvara's feeble light." He straightened, his towering form casting a long shadow, yet his voice lowered to a whisper. What is the world like now, Emmanuel? Is there anything left of our days? The fields, the songs? Or has it all succumbed to their church? Emmanuel's smile faded, his grey eyes drifting to the shadowy ceiling. Not much remains. The fields are tamed, the songs are forgotten. Vailoria's spires shine, yet rot festers beneath. Freeholds barter remnants of a bygone era. Clans traverse the wastes, but the grip of the gods is gone. Power still corrupts, just as it always has. Edwick nodded slowly, as if digesting the bitter truth. So it goes, he murmured, his voice a hollow sigh. We were kings, you and I, dreaming of a world unshackled from their chains, now merely phantoms. He reached out, a clawed hand hovering near Emmanuel's shoulder, then retreated, muttering, "Can't even touch the living." He shook his head. "About that tome, what is your plan?" "It holds the potential to reopen the Netherweave," Emmanuel stated, his voice resolute. "I have sealed the gates, concealed them, but the Church and others are in pursuit. I refuse to allow that darkness to seep into the world." Edwic's eyes ignited with a spark of his former spirit. "Still noble, despite all that has transpired. The world does not deserve your resolve, yet you persist." He nodded, then inquired, "Do you intend to destroy it?" "If necessary," Emmanuel replied, his hand brushing the hilt of Dawnrend, the blade's faint hum resonating in the silence. "I would prefer to preserve rather than annihilate, but I will do what must be done to safeguard it from those who would misuse its power." A heavy silence descended, the air thick with shared grief. Emmanuel felt the weight of Daiden's ashes reflected in Edwic's hollow gaze. This was the closest he had come to revealing that wound, and Edwic's cursed form, once a brother in crown, deepened the ache. "Take it," Edwic finally instructed, his voice low and sombre. "The whispering tome is yours. I trust you, my friend, to keep it secure." He gestured toward the throne, its stones smoothed by time. "There's a switch beneath the armrest. Press it, and the nook will reveal itself." His eyes dimmed, a rattling sigh escaping his chest. "I only wish we had more time, to converse about better days, perhaps." Emmanuel nodded, his throat tight and words escaping him. "So do I," he managed, his voice trembling, a rare quiver in his weary calm, the Draugr's attention fixated on the door, and his eyes ignited with an intense fervour. Before Emmanuel could discern the source of his focus, their long-awaited reunion was abruptly interrupted by a powerful voice. "Lower your weapons, in the name of Silvera!" Emmanuel's heart raced, recognizing a voice of a young paladin, blazing with zeal and certainty. Before he could react, Edwic's glowing eyes met his, a silent plea for action. The Draugr stepped past him, sword raised to serve as a distraction in a final act of defiance. Though Emmanuel speculated the paladin's training was solid, he knew that Edwic's sacrifice would not endure long. The paladin stood poised at the tunnel's entrance, donned in gleaming silver armor adorned with faint pulsing runes, reflecting Silvara's blessing. A crimson sash, vivid as blood, cinched his waist, denoting him as a novice of the elder burden. His cropped blonde hair framed a sharp, handsome visage, bright blue eyes glowing with righteous fervour. A scar marred his cheek, a relic of past battles. His sword, with a hilt fashioned in a unique spindle shape, gleamed with divine light, an heirloom of nobility. The clash of swords rang through the hall, steel clashing against Edwic's ancient blade. Emmanuel dashed toward the throne, hands seeking its worn arms. Under his touch, a stone pressed inward, triggering a heavy click. The throne slid forward, revealing a recess that housed the whispering tome, shrouded in dust-laden cloth. As the sound of battle echoed, Emmanuel grasped the book, turning just in time to witness Edwic's severed head collapse, claimed by the paladin's strike. The paladin stood, breathless, in the throne room's muted glow, his silver armor shimmering beneath the ominous green sconces. Sweat trickled down his forehead as he levelled his sword at Emmanuel, the spindle hilt quivering in his grasp. "Surrender the tome by Silvera's will," he demanded, his voice steeped in fervour, though the edges betrayed a youthful bravado that was beginning to fray. Emmanuel remained still, clutching the dusty, whispering tome. His grey eyes scrutinised the young man before him, finding an unsettling familiarity in his cropped blonde hair and fierce blue gaze, a fleeting memory of someone from a long-lost past that slipped from his mind like sand through fingers. Dawnrend lay sheathed at his hip, its black scabbard silent. He maintained his silence, his time-worn face betraying little. The paladin's gaze flitted to the scabbard, his breath catching. "That sword!" he murmured, eyes widening. With new-found resolve, he straightened, the clanking of his armor echoing in the chamber. "I will take both the tome and that blade," he stated, his voice swelling with authority. "Not today," Emmanuel replied, his tone steady and unyielding, like a boulder resolute against a tempest. His hand lingered near Dawnrend's hilt, fingers at ease but poised, signalling a subtle warning. The paladin's jaw clenched tightly as he advanced, his boots scraping against the weathered stone. "What business does a drifter like you have wielding a sword of that caliber? How did you even come to this place?" His words tumbled forth, a blend of awe and suspicion. A smirk flickered across Emmanuel's lips. "A long story, one that need not concern you," he replied, his voice as cool as the damp air encircling the keep, his stance unwavering. "A vagrant brandishing such a weapon?" The paladin scoffed, circling Emmanuel, his red sash swaying with each calculated move. "Who are you, really?" "Choose a name," Emmanuel countered, tracking the paladin's movements with keen eyes. "I possess many." Suddenly the paladin froze, his sword lowering as recognition dawned like a flash of lightning. His mouth fell open, a shaky breath escaping him. "The Godslayer," he whispered, a mix of reverence and greed flaring in his gaze. "My first mission, and I find you here. Silvara has chosen me." He spread his arms wide as if embracing divine providence. "I am Elder Paladin Leony Creymoor," he declared, his chest expanding with pride. "I challenge you. I have honed my skills for this very moment. Draw your sword, dishonoured king." Emmanuel's expression hardened, the smirk dissipating entirely. "You are not worthy of my blade," he asserted, his voice flat, each syllable laced with a quiet admonishment. He shifted his weight, his cloak rustling as he assumed a poised stance, akin to a spring ready to unwind. Leony's face flushed crimson, his grip on the sword tightening until his knuckles whitened. "You dare mock me!" he snarled, fury igniting as his calm shattered. He lunged, swinging fate's edge in a wide arc, the blade whistling through the air. Emmanuel sidestepped fluidly, the sword narrowly missing him, its momentum propelling Leony forward. The paladin stumbled, the sound of clanking armor accompanying his spin as he swung again. A desperate overhead strike aimed at Emmanuel's shoulder. Emmanuel leaned back, the blade merely grazing his cloak. A ragged strip torn free as dust swirled in the green light. Silence enveloped the room, broken only by Leony's strained breaths. "Fight me!" Leony shouted, his voice cracking under the weight of frustration. He thrust forward, a reckless stab aimed at Emmanuel's chest, but Emmanuel pivoted effortlessly, maintaining his grip on the tome. Leony's blade met empty air, and he faltered, scraping his boots against the stone. Emmanuel gazed at him, pity surfacing in his eyes. Just a boy, he noted, ensnared by the church's deceptions. He hesitated to take the life of someone so young and lost. Yet a grim thought lingered. If Leony did not leave this keep, the church would remain oblivious to the tome's disappearance. "Walk away," Emmanuel urged, his voice low yet firm, almost pleading. His hand hovered near Dawnrend, unyielding, unwilling to engage further in a child's fray. Leony's eyes blazed with anger, his chest rising and falling rapidly. "What?" he stammered, incredulous, his sword trembling in his grasp. "I am Silvara's chosen. You will pay for that insult." Although his voice broke, revealing the fragility of an inexperienced fighter, his fury urged him forward, ready to lash out. Leony's strike came forth with brute force, as Emmanuel had anticipated. He sidestepped, driving the hilt of Dawnrend into Leony's jaw. The paladin staggered, losing his balance, and Emmanuel swiftly swept his legs, sending him crashing to the cold stone. Leony's armoured clatter echoed lightly as dust obscured its shine. The young knight moved to rise quickly, but Emmanuel was quicker. With a swift fist, he struck Leony's temple, causing the paladin's head to snap against the ground. The knight went limp, out cold. It had been easier than Emmanuel expected. He reflected. The caliber of paladins seems to be on the decline. Emmanuel turned to look at the body of Edwick. "Goodbye, old friend," he said solemnly. While beyond saving, he couldn't help but feel that another good soul had been lost to the corruption.